New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, Mind, Body, Spirit University, a leader in fully accredited in-person and online U.S. college degree programs in the topics we cover here. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is meditation with psychedelics. My guest is Sean McNamara, who is a clinical mental health counselor, a psychedelic educator, and meditation instructor. He is author of many books, including Mind Sight, Training to See Without Eyes, Defy Your Limits, the Telekinesis Training Method, Signal and Noise, Advanced Psychic Training for Remote Viewing, Clairvoyance, and ESP, Dewdrops of Infinity, Psychic Abilities, UFOs, and the Puharich Project, Lucid Dream and Out-of-Body Experience. Sean, incidentally, has been a guest 5 times previously on New Thinking Aloud. I encourage you to check our listings page to watch those videos. His newest book is Path of the Golden Teacher, Integrating Meditation with Psilocybin and Other Psychedelics. Sean lives in Colorado, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Sean. It's a pleasure to be with you once again.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Today is going to be a very interesting conversation, meditation with psychedelics. It's a fascinating topic. I have had the pleasure of meditating with psychedelics going back to my college days half a century ago. So I think it's a valuable thing to do, but I think a good beginning for our discussion today would be to talk about your early experience. You got involved in, I understand, in the Vajrayana forms of Buddhism and spent quite a few years at it, I gather. That was your introduction to meditation, I suppose, at a serious level.
It was. So I had been raised Catholic, and for different reasons, mostly because it was a faith-based religion, I wanted to find something that was experiential because I had a fear of death, and I wanted to get more information about the nature of reality. And I thought, well, if I learn how to meditate, that's a tool. Maybe I can use that to investigate the nature of life and the nature of death. And so in my early or mid-20s, I found a Tibetan Buddhist center here in town and started practicing there and fell in love with it right away and became a serious student. And I ended up training with some of those teachers and another teacher for a number of years, counting now. I was probably with them overall for about 14 or 15 years. And that's just math off the top of my head, but for a long time. And spent time meditating daily and going on group retreats, some of them lasting up to a month, and solitary retreats where I'd spend between 10 days or up to 30 days by myself. And this is in a cabin in the woods, right? No electricity, no entertainment, just there to meditate and using an outhouse in the wintertime whenever necessary, setting a wood fire, and just being with my mind. So that was a lot of my training. At a certain point, that came to an end for a couple of different reasons, and it mostly had to do with, some harmful actions from the teachers I was involved with. It was just a hard realization that these are people too. In the Vajrayana tradition, there's the notion of the guru, and if you see the guru as a perfected being, then you can receive the guru's blessing, which in that tradition is necessary to achieve enlightenment, for lack of a better word. I know that's not the best word, but for simplicity, I'll use that word. So there's a devotional aspect to the tradition, and you're really encouraged to see everything they do as a positive act to help you on your journey, that I realized the hard way that that's not really the case. Maybe it is for some teachers or other times in history, but my experience is that these were just human beings with an awful lot of power, social power over their students, spiritual power, financial power, and even sexual power, which unfortunately they used to their advantage. They took advantage of people, and that put a sour taste in my mouth. And that sour taste, though, was a blessing in disguise, because it helped me realize that after all those years meditating, I hadn't really found my own answers about death and the afterlife. Now, Buddhism has its own belief system, and people in that tradition for thousands of years have had experiences related to death, and they've given teachings based on that. But in my personal experience, I hadn't yet answered my personal questions that had brought me to the tradition in the first place. And after having been hurt by a couple of teachers, I decided, because of my dissatisfaction overall, I decided to leave altogether the tradition. And I no longer identify as a Buddhist or as a member of any religion, because I started asking hard questions about religion in general. For me, so I should stop and say, this is not meant to criticize Buddhism. It's not meant to criticize religion, but it's just me clarifying the role of religion in my life. It does not work for me. I tend to be experiential. I don't like being boxed in or limited to dogma. And I certainly don't like giving my personal power away anymore, although I was willing to do that at a certain time in my life. But at a certain point, I stopped. I realized I need to do this on my own, and I'm not going to let someone else give me a blessing or give me permission or give me their instructions, because it might not work for me. So I decided to find my own way. And as you and I have talked about in our previous interviews, that's where my life became focused more on psychic abilities as a way to investigate the nature of reality in a non-religious way. But for me, the psychic path is part of my spiritual path, because it gives insight into the nature of reality, such as our interconnectedness, which makes things like telepathy and clairvoyance possible. So that's basically my upbringing with meditation. And even though I left that tradition, though, it doesn't mean that I stopped meditating. I did stop the particular ritualized practices from that tradition. Honestly, when I tried to meditate, at a certain point, it felt like I was re-traumatizing myself. Tibetan Buddhism is highly ritualized, with using mantras, visualizations, reading very long liturgies, different moving the hands, making hand mudras in a certain way. And for me, at a certain point, each one of those was like a reminder of the hurt that I had experienced under these teachers' guidance. So I had to stop those ritualized meditations and focus on what are called the formless meditations, which are about directly looking at mind and awareness without ritual. I should note that in Theravada Buddhism, there are the teachings of the Buddha and the Pali Canon. And one of the levels of development say that at a certain point, the practitioner realizes rites and rituals are not helpful. So I find it sort of funny that accidentally or through unfortunate causes and conditions, I got to that point where rites and rituals were no longer helpful for me, and I had to abandon them and just work directly face-to-face with my own mind. So I just continued practicing meditation, but in that way, and really in a more experiential or exploratory manner, no longer so boxed in as I was before, and really letting myself be free to explore myself and my reality in new and different ways. And again, part of that is investigating through psychic development.
So the meditations that you learned, as I understand in the Vajrayana tradition, often involve, for example, communication with tutelary deities.
That's right. And I had my tutelary deity, and traditionally it's a private matter, so people don't go around talking about who their deity is. Although in modern America, people do that, especially within their own sanghas or within their own spiritual communities. But I was doing they're called yidams, Yidam, Yidam. That's a tutelary deity, and I had mine that I'd received through an empowerment with the very guru who had ended up hurting me and people I know very, very badly afterward. So I abandoned the practice of the deity after I left that tradition and continued on just with the formless practices where I worked directly with the nature of mind.
Because I understand with regard to psychedelics, particularly DMT, people often report contacting other entities during that experience. And I would imagine your prior experience of working with a tutelary deity would be good preparation for that.
Well, it certainly was in different ways because it helped me prepare for encountering other aspects of my mind in different embodiments. The deity topic is interesting in itself because there are different angles to that practice where I need to see myself as the deity, even if the deity may be in a female form. Everyone has both female and male characteristics, spiritually speaking. But so I would visualize myself as the deity, seeing the enlightened attributes that are already present within. That's the teaching. But also seeing other people as the deity and the whole world as the deity's palace, as if we're living in an already enlightened universe. So it's about changing your perspective and practicing that over and over and over again to break down the barriers in our conceptual mind where normally we're always caught in suffering, we have strong negative opinions about everything, and we feel trapped and stuck. But when one sees oneself as the deity and others, they experience that freedom, a change of perspective. But, I have to admit that after years and years of doing that practice, I hadn't achieved a significant change in perspective or any significant experience of freedom. I was really doing this routine, this ritual over and over and over again, trusting that something would happen. And as part of that practice, before I talk about this, the other aspects of the deity is sometimes the deity can come to you in the dream form, where he or she will appear and interact with you. And sometimes people in real life will come and they'll behave like the deity for some reason. So strange things can happen through deity practice, and I've experienced that. I think in one of our past interviews, I talked about an interaction I had in that liminal space, the in-between space that's very similar to the out-of-body space, where I had a sexual encounter with what I believe is a non-human intelligence, an alien, an ET form. And during that encounter, and I was wide awake, but in this other space as it happened, we consummated our union, and at that moment, this burst of energy came up and filled my spine and my whole body, which some people might describe as a Kundalini experience. And if we look at the ancient stories of yogis in India and Tibet, from where these deity practices originally came, there are often stories of strange beings coming from the sky or appearing in the cave magically. And sometimes they would want to hurt the yogi. Sometimes they would want to make love with the yogi. Sometimes much stranger things would happen with a yogi as a way of transmitting sacred information. And so I wonder if that strange experience I had experiencing sexual union with this non-human being that looked very strange, but still had humanistic features, was that a deity or was that a Yidam experience? Although she did not resemble very much the deity that I'd routinely visualized every day for many years, which is fine because real life is often very different from the way we practice life. But one thing I wanted to say about the ritualized aspect of the deity practice in the Vajrayana in Tibetan Buddhism is that during these practices, there's often a point where one blesses oneself or blesses some implements like a bell or a drum, or drinks this special fluid called amrita. Some people might be more familiar with the word soma from the Vedic tradition, this ancient fluid that gives people the strength of gods or a sense of immortality. Well, amrita means the deathless nectar or the nectar of immortality. And this isn't about the mortality of the body, but about the indestructible nature of the deepest aspect of our awareness. And during this ritual, I'm going to hold something that I brought. I'm going to hold it up to the camera here. It's a small brass container, and it has a lid on it. And this is a symbolic representation of a skull, the top of someone's skull that has been chopped off. And inside it has red wax to seal it so we can hold liquor in it. And the idea was that in ancient India, the yogis there who lived in charnel grounds where bodies would be chopped into pieces or burned or laid overnight to be eaten by animals, they would take their skulls, their skull caps, to use them as implements for drinking a special fluid as part of their rites. And this fluid was the Amrita that was described as giving people incredible powers, psychic powers, spiritual powers, and insight as a way of receiving the Guru's blessing and really fundamentally changing one's perception. So that's the history of this little object as part of the rites and rituals. But today, people are taught to just fill it with watered-down liquor like sake or watered-down whiskey or beer or whatever. Because alcohol has that slight tendency to shift your awareness, but the amount used is not enough to shift one's perspective at all. We're talking about using drops at a time. Again, it's been turned into a symbolic act to just use a little bit during different phases of the practice. And so because I stopped to ritualize practices after I left a tradition, I stopped using this and I just forgot all about it. And then so I spent several years meditating in a different way. And then something woke me up to what this Amrita really is. And that was the next phase of what happened during the Puharich project when I started using psychedelics.
We did a previous interview about your work testing for ESP, as a matter of fact, while working with psychedelics. And for any of our viewers who might be interested, I will link, if you have a computer that can access that hot link, it'll take you right to that particular video. And I, of course, want to talk more about your work with psychedelics. But before we go that far, I want to explore further your meditation practice, because I know in your newest book, The Path of the Golden Teacher, you point out that meditation isn't for everyone.
Right. And, that's something I realized from my own experience. And from watching people on retreat and from something that happened with a close friend of mine when I just started meditating. And after later on I'd study what are the contraindications for psychedelics, I realized some of these were the same contraindications which are not talked about enough for meditation. For example, I'll tell you the story about what happened with my friend. So 1 or 2 years after I just learned how to meditate, a friend of mine asked me to teach him how to do the practice that I was doing at the time. And this is a friend who I'd known in high school, and then we lost touch for a few years and then reconnected. I taught him how to meditate and then said goodbye and didn't hear from him again for quite a long time, at least a year, I think. And then he got in touch with me and I said, well, what happened? How come we lost touch? And he said that he had really gotten into the meditation, and one day he was doing it in a very strong way and he had a psychotic break. One thing I did not know about him when I taught him how to meditate was that he'd already had a history of schizophrenia as a young man. And that's why we had lost touch after high school. And he didn't tell me that when I taught him how to meditate. And after he'd been meditating, he had a psychotic break, and his mother came and found him, and he had been scrubbing the kitchen floor with a toothbrush. That's how profound this break was. And it was brought on by meditating in a very intense manner because he had taken to it in a very strong way. So this is one of the contraindications for psychedelics, and I think it should be for meditation, that if someone is under the age of 25 with meditation, be very cautious. Check your history of mental illness in the family or your risk of mental illness, because meditation at a young age, when it's done too intensely, it can cause a psychotic break, as it had for my friend. So it's not after the age of 25. Generally, the risk reduces in people who don't have a history of mental illness. It's just something, especially for young men, before the age of 25, they're really at risk for something happening, even if there's no history in the family. So that's something to be cautious about. Another thing is if people have sleep disturbances, sleep disorders, and they have a hard time sleeping through the night, or they wake up often, they should be cautious not to meditate late in the afternoon or in the evening, especially if they meditate for long periods of time or practice meditation techniques that involve high levels of concentration, because that can actually ramp up your mindfulness and you become inherently more vigilant for at least several hours. So if you try and fall asleep, you could remain wide awake for a long time and lose the ability to fall asleep until much later in the night or early morning. Now, for regular people who have 9-to-5 jobs, that's not great. For people who are giving out everything up for their spiritual quest, or maybe they're on retreat, this is actually a plus, that you sleep less on retreat. You sleep less when you're practicing intensively. If you don't care about waking up on time to go to your job, or you don't have to, tuning yourself up so that you can maintain awareness late at night is a really helpful thing. But for the regular person who needs to get a good 7 or 8 hours of sleep per night, they should reserve their meditation practice for the morning or early in the afternoon, for sure. Just the way that people should avoid caffeine at night. If they want a good night's rest, they should avoid meditation too. And of course, there are the physical contraindications. And I've seen so many times over the years teaching meditation, when I teach people how to take their posture, either using a meditation cushion or they have the option of using a chair. So many people are driven to sit cross-legged on a cushion because they just have this impression that that's what a meditator should look like, or that they'll have better meditation results sitting on a cushion that way. But what if they have hip problems or back issues or neck issues, which many of people I've trained with have had, especially as they're older in life, more injuries and illness, yet they force themselves to sit a certain way. No matter how much I encourage them, just use a regular chair. And so there's the contraindication. If you have a physical liability, don't force yourself into certain postures thinking you'll meditate better, or because you'll just look like that traditional meditator. Modern people, at least in the United States, are not raised sitting cross-legged on the floor. We are raised sitting on a chair, and we spend so much of the day sitting down at the office, in school, or sitting in our cars in this position. So to force ourselves suddenly to be on a cushion, especially if we haven't had training about how to size up the cushion, it should be a certain height depending on your height and your physical needs. But so that's something that people should be cognizant of too, is the physical risk, because you can hurt yourself more by sitting improperly during meditation, or forcing yourself to sit up a certain way, or forcing yourself not to move, as is the case in certain, not all, but certain Buddhist traditions. You're really not supposed to move at all. But for many people, that will cause more problems than it solves. Well, there's the other idea that people have, that meditation is intended to make you feel better or make you happier. And that's possible with certain types of meditation. Some people meditate briefly with apps just to have some stress reduction. It's a stress coping mechanism for sure, and there's nothing wrong with that. But for people who are using meditation as part of a profound spiritual path, they want to look into the nature of mind and awareness. It does not necessarily create happiness during or after the session. It can be tumultuous. It can bring up past traumas. It can bring up difficult thoughts. It can bring up instances of depression, just because we're starting to unravel the workings of the mind and start to think in abstract ways, start to reconsider the nature of life and reality, and what is the meaning of being alive. If things aren't really what they seem, this can bring up very challenging existential questions for the practitioner. And that requires a certain strength of mind, a certain sense of stability to be able to go through that process of feeling low, sometimes feeling deeply depressed or confused, yet staying with the practice until you see the light at the end of the tunnel. Because it's not permanent when you feel depressed. It comes and goes. So, and usually for a lot of people, meditating up to that point does develop the inner strength to be able to deal with those conflicting emotions that can arise. And in the past, scary memories, sad memories, all of that will come up. The breaking of the heart will come up. Regrets and so much more will come up. So meditation in certain contexts is not designed to make you feel better. It's meant to help you see the ultimate nature of reality and of your mind and what it is to be alive. The other thing, too, is some people might come thinking it will help you psychologically. It will help you heal certain tendencies or proclivities. I found by watching myself and other people that that's not the case by any means, especially in people who have certain personality disorders. For example, narcissistic personality disorder. That's one that comes up a lot these days on social media. But I've known many people, and this is the same with psychedelics, who have some sort of personality disorder, and no matter how long they've been meditating, and no matter how much they've used psychedelics, it doesn't heal that disorder. And the same could be said for certain, non-severe mental conditions. Healing trauma, certainly psychedelics can help. Meditation can help somewhat. In my experience, not as much, maybe as it's being given credit. That if someone wants to heal psychologically, they really should engage the services of a therapist or a counselor. We need another human being to reflect back to us what we're saying, what we're feeling, and really give us a different perspective of ourselves. It's really easy in meditation to ignore that. And there's that phrase, spiritual bypassing. People can meditate, think that they're getting better or developing themselves as a person, but it's not really happening. They're just adorning themselves with this image of, oh, look, I'm a meditator. I'm a good person. I'm better than I used to be. But often that's not at all the case. And it only inflates or aggrandizes their sense of self. And they become more of a nuisance, and they could actually hurt other people that way, especially if they have some degree of social power or social control, especially if they're a teacher, because that's the case often.
So earlier you said that the risks of meditation are very similar to the risks of using psychedelics. That in a way, I mean, the word psychedelic means mind manifesting, and so it's sort of an accelerant to the meditation process. And I think you've also pointed out that a good guideline for people is to pay attention to their intuition. If they have a feeling that maybe they shouldn't meditate or maybe they shouldn't take psychedelics, it's a wise thing to do is to heed that intuition.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, some people give the instruction that if you're having a hard time during your meditation, you should keep going and push through. And maybe in certain cultures at certain times on this planet, that may have been true, especially if the person was working closely with a teacher who could watch over them very carefully. But these days, people are using apps or they're practicing by themselves because they're distant from their teacher. They're using online guided programs. I have a couple of guided programs, so people never need to meet me. They can just practice. But no one's watching over them. And still, they might think, if I'm having a hard time, I'm just going to keep going. And that's where the problem lies. That's what can cause something to snap. And then they go over the edge and then really need professional help coming back from the edge. What I would suggest to people is if you suddenly feel an increase in fear to a severe level or confusion, you just don't know what's going on, it's time to back off and ground yourself. Grounding activities like going outside, being in nature, eating a heavy meal, being with friends and family, surrounding yourself so that you can remember who you are, not who your idealized version of yourself is, but who are you, surrounded by friends and family, engage in ordinary activities to reconnect you to your body, to your comfortable environment at home. Don't push through, but pull back and rest. And then definitely consult with either your spiritual mentor or a mental health care professional for sure. And the same thing with psychedelics. Some people feel that need that they need to go up and dose. there's that phrase, the hero dose, which is generally recognized as 5 grams, which I believe Terence McKenna coined that phrase. And there's such a problem with that phrase, the hero dose, because it invites machismo, that aggressive, I want to be a hero, which that's not really what it means, but it invites that people should take more and more, a higher dose of psychedelic to really have a better experience, which is not at all the case. I find that less is more, but I'm a very sensitive person with psychedelics, so I don't need that much. But it's almost the same thing with meditation, that people feel like they need to push more, push harder, and that will somehow give them the results they're seeking. And, I love America, but I have to say that's an American attitude. If 2 tablets of vitamin C are good, then I'm going to take 5 because I got to stop this cold in its tracks. We do that with medication, we do it with food, we do it with everything, that more is better. And that's certainly not necessarily the case with meditation or psychedelics.
With actually both meditation and psychedelics, the concept of preparation is very important in your book.
So there's some similarities between meditation and psychedelics for preparation in terms of how your mindset is as you go in. And with psychedelics, people are already aware of set and setting, set being the mindset. With meditation, sometimes people might have a hard day and then they just sit down to meditate thinking, I'm just going to undo the day's stresses. But really, that I find that doesn't work. It's really that instead of using meditation to make our life peaceful, what really needs to happen is we need to engage our life to make it peaceful, to pacify our life, and then we'll have a much more peaceful and productive experience on the meditation cushion. That's why, for example, in traditions like Buddhism, there's the notion of discipline and right livelihood, that we need to take care of the way we treat other people, the way people treat us, what we do for a living, how we entertain ourselves, what kind of stuff are we watching on social media and TV. Because if we're distracting ourselves, if we're watching too much violence or highly sexualized material or things that are really upsetting, and we have upsetting relationships and lots of conflict, and if I happen to work at a slaughterhouse, trying to meditate for an hour a day is a lost cause. I'll just be sitting there observing my mind as it tries to deal with the challenge of my entire lifestyle. So what we need to do as meditators is manage our life, and then we'll experience the benefits of that on the meditation cushion. Then we can take that more profound journey into our own minds. With psychedelics, it's the same thing. I often tell people that if you're preparing for a journey, for example, setting your intention, cleaning up your relationships, what are you doing the week ahead of time? It's as if you're holding an oar and you're paddling a canoe, guiding in a certain direction, so that when you finally take the psychedelic, you lose the oar, you lose that kind of control, and you relax and let go and just hope that the canoe continues on in the direction that you were paddling it in. Same thing with meditation. Life is that time when we're paddling our canoe. Meditation is when we lie down in the canoe and let it coast in the direction that we set for ourselves.
Well, let's now talk a little bit more about psychedelics themselves. I think you emphasize psilocybin to begin with.
Mm-hmm. So during the Puharich project, there was a lot of psilocybin for those ESP tests, which I love. It was fantastic at the time. And I had done psilocybin only twice before in college, and I didn't know at all what I was doing. I had no preparation, and I didn't know anything about dosage. Someone just handed me a bag of dried mushrooms, which I slapped into a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and ate, and had a nightmarish experience both times through the night. But now I was more prepared because I'd done more research and I knew about dosage and I'd grown my own mushrooms. And I could already tell that there was more to it than just what was the hallucinations occurring during the ESP tests. That good information was coming through. But the instance that really changed my perspective about spirituality, meditation, and psychedelics was when I had the day when I took LSD to do the ESP test with. For the first couple of hours after the LSD had started affecting me, I did some ESP tests. And I thought, okay, in about an hour, I'll be done, because I really wasn't aware that LSD can last 8, even 12 hours sometimes. So by the time I thought, okay, it's going to start coming to an end now, it was just getting started. Wow, it was a powerful experience. And several things happened during that single journey. One was that I spontaneously perceived two people I love very much who were in relationship with each other, and I could understand more deeply the challenges they had in their lives and with each other. And it's as if I spontaneously perceived instructions for a special healing ritual to do for them, involving spraying alcohol out of my mouth, playing a drum, looking into their bodies and seeing their crystalline energy systems in their body. All of this was happening during the LSD trip. Afterward, I realized this was it reminded me of what a shamanic ceremony would be, although I'm not a shaman. I have no shamanic training whatsoever. But I find it strange that during the LSD trip, I received these instructions of this is what you do to heal these two people. Following that, during the same journey, and I don't know how much time had passed, I had a spontaneous past life regression. And during that regression, I experienced my death. I was sitting in this room and had a feeling of being 200 or 300 years ago, maybe not that long ago, but sitting in this old room, and there was a window, and hearing a gunshot as if from a rifle, and experiencing the bullet coming through the window and striking me in the chest and killing me. And immediately after that ended during the LSD trip, a lot of anxiety that I'd been living with all my life evaporated. It was this feeling of someone's coming after me. I'm going to get in trouble. Something's coming. And I realized that the past life regression gave me information and relieved me of that stress. And finally, the last thing that happened during that journey was this experience of illumination, of understanding what Tibetan Buddhism, the way I'd been studying it, was trying to teach me. That big experience that I'd been waiting for all those years, doing the Yidam practice, the deity practice. Finally, those profound insights that they talk about in the ancient scriptures and in the teachings with words, I finally understood. I had the lived experience of these notions. Now, I don't like using the word enlightenment. I don't. I think there are a lot of problems with that. But I think I actually had a taste of what they describe in that tradition I trained in. I finally had that experience because of the psychedelic. And that's what made me wonder what Amrita really is, what Soma really is. Sometime after that, I found a person named Lama Mike Crowley. He's a Welshman. He's also a Tibetan Buddhist Lama. He's written a couple of books. One of them is called The Secret Drugs of Buddhism. He's a translator of ancient languages, and he's got a lot of videos on YouTube and his books. And he says that if you read these ancient liturgies carefully, this Amrita is a psychedelic. And earlier I was holding up this skull cup that we used watered down liquor in modern days. And I realized what really needs to be in a skull cup is, in my case, it would be psilocybin tea. For some people, it might be LSD. And in ancient times, indeed, it could have been a mushroom. It could have been ergotamine, organic LSD. It could have been a combination of different herbs and plants, but that it was truly a psychedelic. And when I read this, and when I heard him talk about it on video, I realized this is the key that unlocks spiritual insight. And I credit all those years of my meditation that I'd built up for the spiritual insights I experienced during that LSD journey. If I hadn't done all that meditating, I don't think I would have had quite such a spiritual experience. And I know many people do have spiritual experiences without meditation, but with a psychedelic. So I'm not saying it's impossible without meditation. But for me, in my case, I realized the power of combining long-term meditation and then finally unlocking that door of spiritual insight by taking the psychedelic. It's like opening the door in the most powerful way. And so I believe that Amrita really originally was a psychedelic.
A lot of people, when they take psychedelics, they don't necessarily intend to meditate. They may be partying with friends or listening to music or a variety of other activities. But if you're going to meditate while under the influence of psychedelics, are there special procedures?
So there are different stages of the psychedelic journey when one could meditate. One is, let's just generalize and say for an hour or so before imbibing the psychedelic, to prepare your state of mind, to reflect on your intentions, but really to settle and to look inward. We want to see the environment before it changes. And then after you drink, let's say your psilocybin tea, the onset could start to occur 10, 20, 30, or even 40 minutes after drinking it. So during the time sitting and watching the mind and feeling the sensations in the body, just paying close attention because we really want to experience what's going on moment by moment. Of course, if you're doing it socially or recreationally, you're at a concert, that's not going to happen. And this is no judgment on that. I'm just saying if someone really wants to take a more spiritual approach, we're watching the body and the mind moment by moment after drinking your tea, you're taking your acid or whatever it is, drinking your ayahuasca perhaps, watching the body and mind. And then once it has fully set in, this is interesting because this is where there are two types of people. The non-meditator, the person who does not have extensive meditation experience, probably the best thing for them is to lie down and let go and just watch the show. Become part of the hallucination, become part of the experience. Because working with the mind under the influence of psychedelics, really working constructively, is quite challenging. It requires a degree of concentration, paying attention, realizing when your awareness has shifted, when you become distracted and coming back. So months or years of meditation training will help with that. But if you're one of those people, then you watch as the hallucinations come. And that's usually the focus of the first hour. The really meaningful spiritual messages tend to come later. But at this point, we can explore the mind. We can lose ourselves in the space where the hallucinations are occurring, or we can take a step back and explore the awareness that's watching the hallucination. It's as if the hallucinations are here occurring in the front of mind, and sometimes we lose ourselves in them, or we can take a step back into the larger awareness and look at the hallucinations from that point of view. And this gets into exploring, what is the self? What is the sense of self? Am I that being that's lost in the hallucination? Or am I the awareness that's watching the being that's lost in the hallucination? And what about the hallucinations? What about the information that's coming from them? And this includes the more spiritual messages that come later on. Where is that coming from? Is that coming from within me? Is it coming from outside? And is there any difference between the two? So these are the different kinds of contemplations one can do if they're a trained meditator and they know how to navigate the passages of the mind under the influence of a psychedelic.
Now, I know you do have a program that you outline in your book. It looks like a very complex program, and I think it has 7 different stages. Each stage involves a series of meditations, and it could run for a year and a half or so just in preparation for meditating with psychedelics.
There are about 50 different techniques that are taught in the program. Each one has a specific purpose for developing the person with or without psychedelics. I think that was a downfall of mine, saying that this is intended for use with psychedelics, but someone could use the program without ever using a psychedelic. But regarding psychedelics, some of these meditations are cognitively based, helping us investigate our belief systems about ourselves and how we operate in the world. Then there are some heart-centered ones, helping us open our hearts, exploring love and sending love better, opening that part of ourselves, becoming more tender. And of course, many people have reported that the psychedelic helps them feel immense levels of love, even for people they've not loved in the past. So it's very heart opening that way. There's even an instruction helping someone imagine encountering someone from their past who has hurt them, maybe traumatized them even. Because it's a way of healing from trauma, and the guided meditation is very careful, very gentle, creates a safe environment in the mind to do that. But the reason I created the one specifically is because often during psychedelics, we can see the faces of people who have loved us and who have hurt us dearly. And what if that happens to someone who's having their very first journey ever? They see someone who's hurt them profoundly. They might be scared. They might be furious. They might have other complicated emotions during the journey. And so this meditation trains them to be prepared for when this person shows up in their mental screen during the psychedelic journey. And there are other meditations that do similar things, just preparing them for things that could occur while they're tripping on mushrooms or LSD. So the more prepared you are, the more you can actually engage the experience instead of running away. Because often when people start to have difficulty during a journey, they just want it to end. And unfortunately, that's not really possible. The roller coaster is still in process. Can't just stop it. So they want it to end, or they want to distract themselves. They can take off their mask and go watch a movie or go outside. But what if this is a precious opportunity to work with what's coming up in the mind? Well, if you prepared yourself with meditation, you will be prepared to engage that person in your mind during the journey. Whether they're a positive person or a negative person, you'll be more prepared that way.
I suppose there are many other details that need to be attended to. For example, just creating a safe space, a space where you won't be interrupted, for example.
Yeah, it's, a lot of people, I would suggest that the safest place to do it is in your own home, in your bed, in your couch, familiar surroundings. A lot of people these days are going to a group. They're having psychedelic journeys surrounded by 10 strangers in a different environment. And I'm sure that serves a certain purpose for some people. I'm not into that because I don't want to be having the most profound spiritual experience or weeping profoundly because of a loss that I'm grieving when the stranger next to me is laughing uncontrollably for 20 minutes and the person across the room is screaming hysterically because they're terrified or they're angry. For me, this is very personal work. I either want to do it alone, which people can prepare to do it by themselves. The instructions are in the book, or they can train a friend to be a sitter for them. And that's a really important part of preparation. If you're going to have someone watching you and they're not a professional, how do you train a friend to be present with you? And it's mostly the notion of trust. Do you trust this person to respect you when you're weeping like a child, when you're laughing like a lunatic, when perhaps you need to throw up because the nausea is too much? You want someone who loves you, who respects you, to be there with you. And of course, that's the risk of hiring a stranger, hiring a professional sitter. You don't really know them. You want to have someone you've got a long-term relationship with. And it's easy to train them to sit for you. The book has instructions for what they should look out for and how they can support you the very best way. So there's that level of preparation, like your environment, who you're going to have with you. And also basics like how to get ready for nausea, because nausea is common, especially with psilocybin. Not necessarily the purge that people talk about with ayahuasca, where vomiting and diarrhea are quite common. That's not the case with psilocybin. But some people do feel nausea. Some people, in some cases, do throw up. How do we work with nausea? And there are different things like drinking ginger tea. Some people will use cannabis ahead of time. As cancer patients, some are aware of when they're undergoing treatment, nausea is a big deal. So cannabis is very helpful for reducing the nausea. So same thing here, taking a little cannabis before taking the psychedelic can reduce the nausea. I like to go to my health food store and I'll buy those little gummies, the ginger chews that are really intended for pregnant mommies because they have morning sickness. So I'll eat a few of those before a journey just to help with the nausea. So there's that type of preparation too. Because if someone doesn't know to expect a nausea, when it comes, that could add a little confusion and discomfort too.
All good advice. Finally, I think we should say something about a trend that you've observed and has, I guess the best way to put it, a trend that has resulted in mixed results, some good and quite a lot not so good, psychedelic tourism?
That's something I think about a lot. And that's the benefit of, for example, growing your own mushrooms at home, which is quite easy to do. A lot of people are traveling to Central and South America for the ayahuasca experience. Or a lot of people are going to the southwestern United States to collect cacti there. And these are cacti that indigenous people in their tribes have used for hundreds, if not thousands of years for their spiritual traditions. But because a lot of non-indigenous people are seeking the cacti there, which are very slow growing, there's not enough left over for the people who have used this as part of their traditions for a long time. So that kind of psychedelic tourism in the United States and on the Mexican border is damaging other cultures, other societies. And then with Americans and Europeans going to the Amazon, that's changing society down there because of the use of the dollar, because money is playing a major role in affecting the societies that until now, the shaman their role was to take care of their tribe. And that was just their life role. Now, I'm speaking out of turn here because I'm not an anthropologist. I don't know a lot about shamanism, so I don't mean to be disrespectful. But the notion now that foreigners can come and they will pay a lot of money. Certain shamans are being kicked out of their own villages because other shamans are grouping together and creating conglomerates. Or North Americans are coming down and opening businesses down there and edging out other people because now there's competition because a lot of money is involved. And so I think the people who live there, people who are of those cultures, are being harmed in different ways because of the influence of the dollar and because of the commercialization. And it's having an effect on the environment down there in different ways. And so I ask people, do you really need to do that? Do you really feel the need to go fly down there and affect these cultures in that way? Why? When you have the option now to grow your own mushrooms in the privacy and comfort of your own home, it's not expensive to do. And in 2 months, a person could have a flush or a crop of mushrooms to last them for a very long time. And I believe psilocybin does offer so many of the same benefits as other psychedelics. Maybe not all, but some. And so I think anyone who's considering flying down to the Amazon might take a second look. Think twice about it. Do you really want to do that? Because it might be good for you, but is it good for everyone you're going to be affecting down there? I think there's a trend occurring that it would be good as a society, and we could reverse that trend and leave these substances to the cultures and the people who have been using it in traditional ways for a very long time. And just, grow your own mushrooms at home. I know that's a strong opinion. It's my opinion, and it's not necessarily for everyone.
Well, Sean McNamara, this has been a fascinating discussion. I really appreciate the depth of your background, your knowledge in this field. We're talking about a development that is impacting the United States right now. I know where you live in Colorado, legislation is being passed to certify people to guide others through psychedelic trips. Same thing in Oregon. The decriminalization of drugs, something I sought for when I was a student in criminology 50 years ago, is now actually taking place. And it's very exciting, but there are many, many precautions. And I think you've offered our viewers a knowledgeable and a balanced perspective. So I thank you very much.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I had a great time chatting with you.
It's been a pleasure, Sean. I hope we have many more conversations.
You too.
And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
You can now download a free PDF copy of issue 7 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine or order a beautiful printed copy.